I'm just miming. Okay, you can hear now? I don't want to repeat that you should always be here in good time. And the other thing was that I really want to welcome you all, because we have been looking forward to this, to be able to welcome you, and also to be able to see you in full person. That's really nice. And welcome to Denmark, welcome to Skanderborg, and welcome to this Augustinus building here. And we who have been preparing the practical part of this are looking forward, or we really wish and we hope that you in the next few days during this conference will enjoy to be here and be together, and that you will be able to to create something together, to inspire each other. So when you leave this place, you bring with you some inspiration that you can take to your own private and individually work. That's really on our heart that you do that. Tonight, you're going to hear about one of the persons here in Denmark who have had an immense impact on the Danish culture, on the development, on the society, both in religious and in social and economic spheres, this person, and that is Grundtvig. And I'm very thankful that our guests, our special guests tonight, they accepted our invitation and said, yes, we can and we will attend tonight and give a talk about this subject. So you're going to hear about Grundtvig, and it is Eva Bak and Augustinus, if any, they know about the topic and the subject tonight. So let's welcome them. And then I know they will introduce the theme on their own, but we're having a short pause after 1 hour, I think. And you know, there's no dance tonight, but there is still a pop-up bar. And then after, we have the second part, and that is Eva, who will then show some pictures and tell the story about a special folk high school in the States, I think. So welcome to Aage and Eva.
Thank you very much. And when we are in a folk high school, we always start with a song, and we will do that now. Pardon me? Yes. The pianist will play the melody through firstly, and then we come on. I'm sure you don't know. We try. Well, it shall be about Grundtvig, the founder of the Danish folk schools, or we could say the mother of the Danish folk schools. There are lots of problems in this world. Most of these problems we are able to solve, fortunately. But one problem we are not able to solve: life itself. Life is and will remain a mystery. We were born without any directions for use, although we have to live this mysterious life, so it is for joy, for oneself, and for others. Joy is the basic tone of life, so it is if you enter the universe of Grundtvig. Grundtvig was, as Ole said, a cultural reformer. When the American Press in 1991 wrote a book about Grundtvig and the Danish folk high schools, he entitled the book "The Land of the Living," with a subtitle, "The Danish folk high schools and Denmark's non-violent path to modernization." For Grundtvig, it was necessary to combine education and culture. The cultural element poses the question, who am I? How can I be present in my own life? This is of importance for life, for society, for democracy. When a Dane intends to tell about the specific characteristics of the Danish society and culture, he often mentions Grundtvig, the folk high schools, and the Grundtvigian movement in general, and the cooperative movement, which from the beginning was linked to the Grundtvigians. That means that Grundtvig's thoughts in some ways, up till now, have been the leading ideas in what we today usually call national identity. You can say that Grundtvig has until today kept a position as the incarnation of Danishness, the icon of, or the main figure in Danish identity. Grundtvig, who lived from 1783 to 1872, was a clergyman, a poet, a historian, a politician, and an educationalist. He was contemporary of two other eminent Danes, Hans Christian Andersen and Søren Kierkegaard, both far better known in the world at large than he is. But from a Danish viewpoint, there's little doubt that it was Grundtvig who left the most important mark on Danish culture. And saying that, I had to say that Grundtvig's educational ideas, the so-called folk high school, the school for adults, is based on the spoken word as fundamental in teaching and an understanding of education as education for life rather than education giving merely impact knowledge. Grundtvig, first of all, Grundtvig's impact on the church. When we are telling about Christianity in Denmark, we say that most Danes are adherents of the happy Christianity. That means a Christianity open to human, cultural, and founded in the living words, the spoken words in connection with the sacraments instead of the written language in the Bible. Christianity in Denmark is not a gloomy Christianity, but a Christianity interacting with humanity and with the base in the Sunday service instead of the Bible, understood as a fundamentalistic basis of the Christian doctrines. I want to emphasize that Grundtvig's understanding of Christianity is very important. Grundtvig was a poet writing songs and hymns, and his hymns take up almost half of the official book of hymns inside the Church of Denmark. Our evangelical Lutheran church includes more than 70% of the population, and almost every child in Denmark knows his hymns for Christmas. Grundtvig's worldview has a theological background, even when he is dealing with secular matters, for instance, politics and education. Secondly, Grundtvig's view of society. When we, the Danes, are informing about our political system, we normally quote Grundtvig's poem, Denmark's Consolation, in which he says that in this lies our wealth. On this tenet, on this principle we draw, that few are too rich and still fewer too poor. And quoting those lines, we are saying that the Danish welfare state, our egalitarian society, has its roots in Grundtvig's ideas. And the balance between individual freedom and social responsibility is in Denmark very often traced back to the influence of Grundtvig. Linked with our pride of our Grundtvig-inspired social balance is the way we stresses the Danish understanding of democracy as based on a shared dialogue and communication. We always make compromises in Danish politics. Our decisions have the dialogue as their background. Thirdly, Grundtvig's educational ideas. The Danish way of resolving through dialogue is connected to Grundtvig's educational ideas as the heart of the Danish national identity. When it comes to education, we as Danes normally use the term school for life in order to say that Danish education is close to life, is education in order to understand life instead of being a tool for making a career as a result of an examination. Education is not based literary, bookish knowledge, but on the oral tradition out of which human beings can establish an interpretation of life. In this way, Grundtvig until today has been the key figure in what he himself regarded as the fundamental circles or areas of life: church, society, and school. That means that up till now, Grundtvig has been a main figure in the making of the Danish national identity. The main characteristics in what we call danskhed, Danishness, has influenced Danish culture so much that Denmark normally is called Grundtvigs fædreland. That means Grundtvig's native country, a phrase including every Dane, the whole population. Let me tell you the story of Grundtvig's life, a short version only. There's a lot to tell, and I only have time to tell you about the most important events in his life. He was born in 1783 in Udby at Zealand and died in Copenhagen in 1872 at the age of 89. And until a few days before his death, he still celebrated the service in his church in Copenhagen every Sunday. Grundtvig was born in the age of Enlightenment. When he was 6 years old, the French Revolution shocked Europe. The old Grundtvig still remembered debates between the school teacher and the parish clerk about the value of the revolution. Grundtvig himself was all his life against revolutions. But after all, he was influenced by the revolutions and the Enlightenment's ideas of the role of common people in society and politics. The idea that common people had to take part in the government of the country. Grundtvig's home was a vicarage in the countryside, and Grundtvig's father was an old-fashioned Lutheran Orthodox clergyman. Grundtvig himself started up as a follower of his father, but being a first-year student at the University of Copenhagen, the only university in Denmark in his lifetime, Grundtvig quitted the Lutheran Orthodoxy. Until Grundtvig got his master's degree in theology, he was influenced by the ideas of the Age of Enlightenment. Although Grundtvig later criticized the materialistic and atheistic tendencies of the 18th century. He in fact was inspired by the idea of general education of the common people and the democratic idea that the people has to make the decisions, not the absolute monarch. In the first years of the 19th century, Grundtvig met the Romantic movement coming from Germany. The Romantic movement left a permanent mark or stamp on Grundtvig. The idea of man as a spiritually gifted creature. The idea that man's knowledge of himself is linked to the study of history, and the idea that every nation has its own main characteristics. Grundtvig was regarded as an upcoming poet, but after a few years, he left the Romantic movement. What happened? The fact is that in 1810, he was cast into a spiritual crisis, which resulted in his return to Lutheran Orthodox Christianity. The following years, he had a fundamentalistic interpretation of Christianity, the idea that the written Bible is the only word of God, a book in which every word is inspired by God himself. But Grundtvig didn't continue being a fundamentalist. In 1825, Grundtvig gave up his fundamentalistic interpretation and stressed from now on the living word connected with the sacraments, baptism, and Eucharist as the basis of church and Christianity. For Grundtvig, Christianity is not something read in a book. Christianity has nothing to do with dead letters, as he said, but has to do with the living word of God, linked to the historical Christian tradition. For Grundtvig, Christianity is reality, something happening every Sunday in the Sunday's service. In the very same year, Grundtvig's rupture with a fundamentalist Christianity and his discovery of the living word, he came into conflict with the establishment of the Danish church. Grundtvig used the idea of a living Christian tradition when he attacked a new book written by a young professor of theology. at the University of Copenhagen. For Grundtvig, the rationalistic ideas of the professor were false Christianity. The professor said that the foundation of Christianity was the Bible, and the only ones to interpret the Bible were the clergymen. Grundtvig's attack was written in a very violent language, and the professor carried on a lawsuit against Grundtvig, and Grundtvig left his vicarage. Now he was completely isolated in Denmark, but he had a good protector in the Danish king, Frederik VI. And he gave Grundtvig money for 3 journeys to England in 1829, 1830, and 1831. Grundtvig wanted to start up a work on some historical manuscripts in relation to Denmark. In fact, the result of the journeys to England were much more the inspiration Grundtvig received from the political and social life in England. Grundtvig was influenced by at least 3 characteristics of the English community. Let us take a look at these characteristics. Firstly, the British idea of freedom as the base of modern society. Individual freedom and freedom for religion. Second, the British development, the industrial life of England, as a result of the dynamic spirit England and the Nordic countries has in common, according to Grundtvig. But although Grundtvig was impressed by the industrial development, he was also afraid of the results of the modern industrial society. Thirdly, the most important inspiration came from English education and the social life of the universities. Firstly, Grundtvig was inspired by the idea of the so-called monitorial system, in Danish indbyrdes undervisning, in which educational advances were sought by letting the students educate each other. Grundtvig changed the original idea quite a lot, and when he returned from England, he stressed interaction and dialogue through the living word, the spoken oral word, as the base of education. Secondly, Grundtvig was inspired by the English universities. At Cambridge University, Grundtvig made a contact between professors and students which were completely unknown in Copenhagen. It was obvious in Cambridge that the lecturers regarded students as persons it was a pleasure to talk to. I should sum up the results of Grundtvig's journeys to England. The English idea of freedom became crucial for Grundtvig, and it is the background for his democratic visions. The idea of the monitorial system and the idea of education as a dialogue became part of Grundtvig's idea of the oral living word as the base of man's general education. When Grundtvig returned from England, he wrote his most important text in prose, The Mythology of the North, from 1832. In this book, he stresses the living spoken word as the most important feature in what he regards as a Nordic culture and a special Nordic general education, a culture opposed to the academic general education linked to the university and to the Latin language. For Grundtvig, the national heritage, ancient pre-Christian mythology, literature, and history is the base of the non-academic general education he wanted to support. For Grundtvig, every nation has its special characteristics, its own character, what Grundtvig calls in Danish, Folk-Enlightenment. And Grundtvig always stresses that this character is something valuable. It has to do with the image of God in man. This means that when a nation receives Christianity, Christianity has to be shaped by the national characteristics. National heritage is very important as a presupposition for understanding and accepting Christianity. As mentioned, Grundtvig for many years was without influence in the Danish community. But in 1836, he wrote his first folk high school pamphlet. And from now on, his ideas were very influential in Denmark. The direct background of the folk high schools are the political events in Denmark in the late 1830s. In the years after Grundtvig wrote his Mythology of the North, the first elections to political assemblies were held in Denmark. They were called de rådgivende stænderforsamlinger, the advisory committees, and they were not, as the name says, real democratic institutions. Grundtvig liked the advisory committees, and he regarded the national education as the way Danish citizens had to be trained before they became members of the advisory committees. The idea of the folk high school was born out of Grundtvig's reflections on how it was possible to educate people to become members of the advisory committees. I'll return to the folk high school later. Here I only want to tell you a bit about the background. In 1849, we got a free constitution in Denmark, where every grown-up male person was given a vote, was given the possibility to take part in the election of the members of the two Danish chambers in the Houses of Parliament. Today we have only one chamber. Grundtvig was elected to the parliament, and he fought for his ideas of a shared dialogue and communication as the base of political decisions. Since 1839, Grundtvig was again a pastor, a vicar in Copenhagen, and his little church became the heart of the Grundtvigian movement until his death in 1872. I've told you a little bit about Grundtvig's life, and I hope you have understood how closely Grundtvig's life and Grundtvig's ideas are linked. Grundtvig wasn't thinking in a systematic or methodical way. His ideas were born out of life. Because of this connection between Grundtvig's life and ideas, I have described how Grundtvig developed his ideas of politics and education. If you don't know anything about Grundtvig, I have, I think, given you the impression that Grundtvig was mainly an educationalist and a politician. In fact, first and foremost, Grundtvig was a vicar and a theologian. Grundtvig has written more than 1,500 hymns, a lot of them used in the Church of Denmark. His idea of the living word linked to the sacraments, baptism, and Eucharist as the center of Christianity was in a way the center of all his ideas. In baptism, the original image of God in man is restored, he said. But exactly this image of God in man, the likeness of God, is also the base of his openness towards society and culture. His understanding of the culture as containing valuable elements, although it isn't Christian. For Grundtvig, also the pagan culture contains traces of the likeness between God and man. All the Grundtvigian ideas have a theological basis. The leading anthropological concepts in Grundtvig's ideas are what we in Danish called the living word, det levende ord. That is the spoken oral word, and what is called levende vekselvirkning, in English, vivid interaction. In order to describe the living word and the vivid interaction, it is necessary to give a short introduction to Grundtvig's view of man, Grundtvig's anthropology. Exactly here, in the theological roots of Grundtvig's view of man, we find the universal aspects in Grundtvig's ideas, as well as the particular. The connection between Grundtvig's universalistic view of man and his understanding of the difference between the cultures and traditions of mankind, the particular, is to me one of the most interesting topics in Grundtvig's thinking. Grundtvig's view of man is dominated by the idea of man created in God's image. And he stressed that the image of God in man is not completely destroyed through the fall, as Martin Luther claimed. The image of God is connected to the idea of man as primarily a person gifted with the power of or talent of speech. Perhaps it is, in Grundtvig's view, a human life as an experiment that he reveals himself as most original. In the introduction to his work, Mythology of the North, he proclaims, and I quote, "The human being is no ape, but a unique, wonderful creation in whom divine powers shall make themselves known, shall develop and clarify themselves through 1,000 generations as a divine experiment, which reveals how spirit and dust can interpenetrate and be clarified in a common divine consciousness." What Grundtvig means is that an ape can only imitate. But precisely about man, there's nothing firmly settled. Thank you. Precisely about man, there's nothing firmly settled. A human being can evolve lifelong. No one has yet seen what it can become. Every single human being is, so to speak, a new agenda put into the world. That was the amazing. And in the same way with life, it is not just something that can be measured and weighed and put on a formula. Life is inexhaustible, constantly in motion. It cannot be calculated. It is this perception that permeates the Norse mythology, that every human being born is unique. The individual human being is an unprecedented agenda put into the world. The likeness between man and God has to do with the language, because God has created the world by speaking. Being a Christian theologian, Grundtvig was aware of the power of sin in human life. But although man is a fallen creature, the likeness with God, or elements of it, has survived the fall. Man is still able to hear the voice of God and to answer. For Grundtvig, the essential elements, the nature of man, is the possibility of vivid interaction, the way human beings are able to start up a conversation with each other as well as with God. The best explanation of Grundtvig's concept of freedom is that it is the freedom to evolve as a person and the freedom to engage in society as a citizen. It is the freedom to have roots and to grow, freedom to move around and to change one's mind, freedom to be yourself together with others, freedom for the common good. But it is not a political program nor a pedagogical philosophy that can be implemented. The unique individual human being is embedded in a community. We now come to Grundtvig's idea of folkelighed. For Grundtvig, folkelighed is a kind of translation of the concept of nationality. Let me explain the concept folkelighed. I use the Danish word simply because it's very difficult to find a translation. The direct translation, no, the explication of the word is that the word contains what is like the character of a people, what belongs to the character of the people. In Grundtvig's universe, you will find some nationalistic elements. Like most of the nationalists in the 19th century, Grundtvig emphasizes the values of the Danish national character. But he also stresses the idea that every nation has its own values, its own right to live and to exist. Every nation has the right to exist independent and free, but also in interaction with the other nations of the world. And doing this, Grundtvig is inspired by a German whose idea of nationality isn't at all chauvinistic. His name is Johann Gottfried Herder. Like Grundtvig, Herder was a theologian, but also a historian, a poet, and a philosopher. He lived in the pre-Romantic period and died in the beginning of the 18th century. If you go to Herder, you will find the same combination of nationalism and freedom, or better, the Simard idea of stressing the values of different nations inside mankind, as you find in Grundtvig's works. Grundtvig talks about Folk-Ånd, or public spirit, and says that this public spirit is created by God. Every public spirit has the same right to exist. No one is better than others or superior to them. Together, they fulfill the history of mankind. Each people is justified in its own way, is incomparable to any other. Very important for Grundtvig is the fact that the public spirit is represented not by scholars, kings, or noblemen, but common people, peasants, artisans, and so on. People who isn't influenced by foreign education. Grundtvig opposed the Latin instruction of students. For Grundtvig, each nation or national community represents a special branch of humanity. Each nation is permeated by a unique spirit which tries to find expression in, first of all, its ancient pagan mythology, its literature, and its history. For Grundtvig, God has created man to fulfill a historical evolution, a progress. This progress has to develop the image of God in man. But for Grundtvig, the image is divided between different peoples and nations. The complete mankind is brought together from different national identities. For Grundtvig, there is an Indian folkelighed as well as a Jewish or a Danish folkelighed, and they are all necessary and valuable. For Grundtvig, it is important to stress how Christianity and folkelighed, public spirit, has to interact, to stay in a relationship, but a free relationship. But it is also important to stress how public spirit or the national identity is valuable, independent of Christianity, simply because it's created by God. The national identity isn't just a mere condition of Christianity, but the basis of the vivid interaction, the dialogue, the conversation inside a people. For Grundtvig, the word is spoken, the word is the spoken oral word. Grundtvig says again and again that the written word is inferior compared with the living spoken word. The spoken word is connecting living human beings. Vivid interaction only takes place when the speaking persons are brought together. Grundtvig's idea of political democracy is based on the same idea. The nation as a whole has in Grundtvig's universe to be free, and for Grundtvig, freedom implies the idea of a nation taking its own decisions. And like the nation as a whole, the inhabitants of a society have to be free too. The mutual love inside a nation constitutes the way political decisions are made. Grundtvig doesn't want certain groups to promote their own economical and political interests. For Grundtvig, the elected council has to decide what is the common good of the society. The elected council is characterized by a free debate in vivid interaction. This free oral debate presupposes the education of the people, presupposes an enlightened people. The enlightenment of the people is crucial to Grundtvig. And when Grundtvig criticized the French Revolution, the essence of his criticism is that the unenlightened mob assumed power. When I told you about Grundtvig's life, I mentioned the folk high schools. Originally, Grundtvig created this very special way of giving education in order to make the Danish people mature to take political decisions. The folk high school, where the people is enlightened and educated to rise above narrow selfish interests to look at the common good, is thus a central part of his political universe. But in fact, the folk high schools, as mentioned, is much more. The education is based on the national, historical, and poetical heritage. Let us take a look at Grundtvig's idea of the folk high school, or better, the educational ideas of Grundtvig. He often expressed himself in lyrics in order to motivate people and capture them by the heart so that they wake up and become self-conscious. The fact that his thoughts are wrapped in poetry also explains why they have never made outside Scandinavia. Translating him is next to impossible. We have a book of hymns in the church, and we have a book of songs in the folk high school. I think there are 200 songs of Grundtvig and a lot of others about the people of Denmark and our dreams. And that was the way he communicated, writing lyrics. In 1839, he wrote, "Is the light for scholars only," the song we sang earlier. I quote the first verse, but in a more direct translation, which is very difficult to sing. I take it in my direct translation. Is the light for scholars only in order to spell correctly? No, the heavens want good things for more people. And light is the gift of heaven. And the sun rises with the farmer, not at all with the learned. Enlightens better from toe to top, how he who is the most active. The enlightenment must go from toe to top, if any qualitative change shall come, not from top to toe. But behind this poem lies a showdown with the dominant negative view of human nature, which was especially marked by Martin Luther. Grundtvig does away with that. According to Luther, human nature was, as previously indicated, utterly corrupted and the root of all evil deeds. According to Luther, were the actions of man evil because man is fundamentally evil. Grundtvig doesn't share that view of life, of man. Grundtvig does not consider man to be completely and utterly corrupt. According to Grundtvig, the evil comes, so to speak, second. According to Luther, the image of God in man was completely and utterly obliterated, while for Grundtvig, the image of God in man is seen as an expression of life itself. Indeed, the very condition that it was possible to live an ethical life, that it is possible to do the good. We are created in the image of God. And as Grundtvig says it, Jesus is, so to speak, man in his true purpose. For Grundtvig, joy was the ethically bearing phenomena of life. The Enlightenment was to lead to the common good. Teaching must be life enlightening. The whole intention of teaching is to make the students aware of what the meaning of their lives is. Through enlightenment of the individual, the mystery of human life will slowly be solved, he said. School is both enlightening and enlivening. Learning is also learning to live and to love. The educational aim of the folk high school is not solely for the individual benefit, but also learning to be part of something bigger, to be part of society. As Grundtvig framed it, education of the people, by the people, and for the people. Teaching must aim and at educating the whole human. In Grundtvig's time, the school were characterized by rote learning. Students had to learn things by heart and repeat them word by word in front of the teacher. This method, along with the curriculum and exam-focused teaching, only took the intellect into account. Grundtvig wanted to create a school that would attach as much importance to imagination and emotions as to the intellect. The folk high schools has to enlighten and enliven. The folk high schools must, of course, provide knowledge and skills, but this must be done in a way so that the students are enlivened. To Grundtvig, this meant that the students had to enjoy their lives in the present, in that way, find the courage to change what has to be changed. He also said, in order to learn anything about something, one has to love it first. By relating the education to the student's own life, the student would naturally develop interest and passion for the matter. The folk high school's teaching must be historical, poetical. In short, this means that through teaching, we become aware of the history we share as a people with others, and through the poetical, from Greek poesis, to create. From the poetical, we animate to discover the dreams and hopes we harbor for our future lives and society. Especially the myths and poetry can help to aspire this. The folk high school has to be a living interaction. This is perhaps one of Grundtvig's key pedagogical concepts. The living interaction must manifest itself in the togetherness between teacher and student. Teacher and student must learn from each other. They are equal when it comes to learning about life based on a mutual respect. The teacher is in that sense not only a professional, but also an individual person in relation to the students. The most important learning period is the youth. Grundtvig reasoned that education as such should not be confined to the childhood years. His emphasis was on adult education, and child education didn't interest him that much. To him, the most important learning period in a human's life is the youth, because in this time of your life, your attention is directed towards the external, and you still have the ability to dream. The free living word is the base of Grundtvig's idea of the folk high school. The spoken word is free. This means that teacher and student have to meet each other in vivid interaction, in a living dialogue. It also means that students have to learn by lust, and not because they have to learn in order to get through some examinations. In fact, the fact is that the Danish folk high schools is not only inspired by Grundtvig, but in some important ways from persons who belong to the common people. This was, of course, not contrary to Grundtvig's visions. He wanted to wake up the freedom and responsibility of the common people, but he was himself an academic from Copenhagen. The folk high school model with a lot of schools is mainly due to the influence of a man by name Christian Kold. I'll return to him shortly later. The folk high schools arose in a period of decline in Denmark. In 1866, the democracy was reduced because of the new situation of the country after a war with Germany. The result of this war was, in 1864, the loss of southern Jutland, and in a way, the war was the end of the collapse of the Danish state since the Napoleonic Wars. We lost Norway in 1814, and the state was bankrupt. And in the 1820s were a period of silence and lack of initiative. When Denmark lost southern Jutland, the collapse in a way was complete, although the Danish state was still existing. Because of the loss of southern Jutland, the folk high schools got the role as a protector of the Danish kingdom. And in getting this role, the so-called ordinary man was very active in building the nation. The person from below who influenced the Danish folk high school was a teacher and a former shoe repairer, Christian Kold. Christian Kold was a follower of Grundtvig, but he was also influenced by the great pietistic revival movements in the 19th century. In fact, this doesn't mean that the Danish folk high schools is influenced by pietism. By the way, the differences between Grundtvig and Kold were never sharp. and Grundtvig accepted the idea of a lot of folk high schools spread all over the country. And he also accepted the person Christian Kold. Indeed, Grundtvig supported him in a lot of ways. Important is the fact that the folk high schools became the result of the work of the common people, persons like Kold, next to Grundtvig, the most outstanding representative of the Grundtvigian lay movement. This means that in some ways it was the Danish population itself which founded the folk high schools and the folk high school movement. Yes, that was it. Yeah. You're welcome. Yes. From the, I don't understand. No, I don't think so. His Christian influences is much more the Orthodox Church, really. No, Catholic, the Greek Orthodox Church. He was very inspired, and you can trace it in a lot of his hymns. And therefore, he also has another view of man than the traditional Lutheran view of man is. Yes, yes. And as I tried I can say another thing. When a lot of Danes immigrated to the States in the late 19th century, and there were two groups. There were the sad Danes, there were the Pietists, and the happy Danes, that were the Grundtvigians. They had a much more positive view on the world, and that is still in the folk high schools in Denmark. We today, you know, when a young man comes to a high school, or a woman comes to a high school in Denmark, folk high school in Denmark, we are not telling him or her what to do, but they shall themselves find out what to do. That's the whole idea. It's non-ideological, but a theme as sustainability is, of course, in these years all over the folk high schools, and they are discussing that topic everywhere, not just now. But it is up to the person, her and himself, to find out what's to be done. But the idea is that he or she has to do something, that the other people and society is a matter for them. Yes? Yeah. How they spread out over the country. Yes, of course, Norway was more or less a Danish culture. And you know, I've probably not said it so much, but there's no high schools, folk high schools in Denmark, which are initiated from the government. It's people themselves who start them. Yes. If you and I think we must have a new folk high school here in Skanderborg, then we can start it. And if we can have a certain number of students in the first year, we can get support from the state, even if we will start a socialistic folk high school. Yes, it's free. That is the whole idea. It's get going. Yeah. Did I answer your question? You can say that Norway, Grundtvig was is a known person and an influential person in Norway, and also to a certain point in Sweden. But in Sweden, the social democratic movement took over, so to say. So the public enlightenment in Sweden is more historical seen, more initiated by the social democratic movement in Sweden. But in Norway and Denmark, Grundtvig is the main person, and the Swedes know him, and the Finnish too, you can say. Yes. Yes. Ja, det er nok en god idé. Kan du ikke? Nej, der skal lige give den tryk, tror jeg. Et let tryk. Ja, men der skal lige et let, den er på mute. Ja, sådan. Nej. Nej.
Okay, now? Yeah?
Super.
Okay. So first, let me say something. We have in the Bell College in Israel an institute which based on Grundtvig ideas through its influence on the Jewish and Israeli philosopher Martin Buber.
Yeah.
And we have a lot of students, of young people who want to influence on the Israeli society through education. So it's, for me, it's a very interesting lecture. Thank you very much for it. And a lot of students are waiting to hear about this lecture. And then I wanted to ask 3 questions, please. First, if the recognition for Grundtvig in Denmark of nowadays is enough. I mean, people know about Grundtvig today. Second question is that connect to the first one is what the scope, how many folk high schools or students in folk high schools you have in Denmark today?
Yes, the first question, how many Danes know Grundtvig?
Many, but you know, if the public consciousness is, know about in general about Grundtvig influence on the nowadays.
Many people don't know, but you know, it is so much a part of Danish culture that you can be a Grundtvigian without knowing him. Understand? Our schools, our way of pedagogical thinking in Denmark is so influenced by him. He also he is so influential without, you don't have to know him. The folk high schools, did you ask how many young people go to them? Between 6 and 8%. But you know, you come there, and you have to be 18 years old. And you come there and you don't get any paper. You come there because you want to. And you want to be there. No examinations at all. It's, there's a German word which maybe can explain what it's about. They call it Bildung. Bildung, yeah. You are, well, yes, that is what is in this school for life. You have to be a good parent, you have to be a good citizen, and you have to be active in community. That is, if we don't if we are not active in the community, we don't have any democracy. That is the idea, and the dialogue has to be between everyone. Ja, du skal nok have en mikrofon.
Thank you. I'm from the US, and in my own education, learning about the Highlander Center in Tennessee, which was
Hear
inspired.
about it later.
Yeah, I want to
Yeah.
hear that later. My question is that I'm surprised to hear about the influence of the Greek Orthodox Church, because what I got from your talk is that Grundtvig had a conception of perhaps universal suffrage. Everyone has a vote. Is that true?
Yeah.
And that men and women both, or boys and girls, should both have access to education. Is that true?
Yes.
And that's completely counter to what I think of as orthodox.
I said he was inspired.
Inspired,
you know,
by-
he is a Lutheran. He's a Lutheran,
yes.
but he's not, doesn't agree with the view of man that Luther has.
Yeah.
He is a Lutheran, but he is inspired of the Orthodox spirituality.
How did that influence the folk schools then? Because
It doesn't
even
probably
even the
it,
English
I would say
universities were very exclusionary.
it doesn't necessarily influence the
Okay.
folk high schools.
Okay.
You know, the folk high schools, that is easy, that's important to say, they are not Christian schools.
So
They are
he-
not Christian schools,
he was-
but the background is Christian or cultural Christian, or what you could call it. But you can come, anyone can come there.
Yeah.
And as I said, we can make a socialistic folk high school if we want. Yes, it's possible.
But
simply.
I'm just appreciating that at a very early point in the thinking about democracy, he was one of the few people to articulate a universal egalitarian
Yes.
that all members, male and female,
And
and
yes, and
presumably
he-
black and white.
What is rather unknown to many Danes is that when we got the free constitution in 1849, he wanted women to vote too. But that was impossible. It came in 1915. Yeah, that's.
From the remote audience. Oh, yeah. How about this? We have one question from the remote audience. Franz, if you're able to unmute, I think you may be able to ask it yourself. Otherwise, I can read it for you.
Yeah. Grundtvig was very more or less obsessed with language, and he was caring a lot about the language and teaching people how to care for the language. But what we've seen lately is that Danish people don't care much about their language, and the Danish language authorities don't care much about the language. Do you have any idea of why that has happened?
Do you think we don't care about our language?
Well, what we see is that lots of things are taken over by English, and people don't. And the Danish, what do you call it? The Dansk Sprognævn basically accept all kinds of forms when they just have spread enough. There's not much.
I really think that we care about our language, but you're right. There comes a lot of foreign words into the Danish language. The difference is, for instance, my wife and I come often to the Faroe Islands, and they make new words themselves. And in Iceland, they do the same. They are so small languages that they don't dare to import all the English words, but you're right, we are doing it in Denmark, and Dansk Sprognævn shows it.
Myles Horton And then,
Er der et spørgsmål? Et spørgsmål, så tager vi det. Du kan få den her.
Okay, it's working. So as you know, this is a conference about studying intentional communities. And there's so many communities in Denmark. There's eco-villages and co-housings. Do you think it is in part because of Grundtvig, or are there other reasons why there's so many in such a small country, do you think?
I think it's due, among other things, to his influence. Eva, hvad hedder en forening på engelsk? Associations. You know, the most Danes are members of several associations. We are called an association country. And well, so it is. I think he might be the one. And I think also that, you know, he with his lyrics, he wakened up the Danes. Do you understand? And I think that, of course, it's not easy, as the former questioner said, with the import of everything from other countries. But we are, of course, we are open to other countries. It is really not nationalistic, but it is a dream. You know, this folk high school book is filled up with dreams about Denmark. We have a lot of problems with our economy, but there's more to say about society than economy. And that, I think, the most Danes are aware of. And for instance, you know, we have friends who have quite other political meanings than we have. That's okay. We can talk about it. That's no problem for most things. Yeah.
I don't know if there's any sound in this, but I have my own sound. And I think I want to say thank you very much. I have learned a lot about Grundtvig that I didn't know before. And we still have one more history, or a special history about a folk high school from the States. We will have that later in. So I suggest we just meet 9:30 here, 9:30, 15 minutes break. Is that okay? Okay, see you in 15 minutes again, 9:30. Thank you. Okay. Now we're having a new talk about this South American folk high school, and it's North American, and it's Eva Bak we can welcome now. So please have a seat and let's listen. Thank you.
Yeah? Okay. Yeah. Yes, what I have to say is has to do with what Aage just said, but it's a completely different story anyway. I will tell you about this man, Myles Horton, who lived from 1905 to 1990. He was born in Savannah, Tennessee. In his childhood, he saw many people who were suppressed and who were working in coal mines and who were having need of big change. And he knew from he was very small that he was going to do something about that. His mother was a Christian, and she said, God says that you have to love your neighbor. So you have to love your neighbor, and that's all you need to think about. You don't have to think about God as long as you see to it that you love your neighbor. And that was what he carried with him from he was small. Even though they were rather poor, he came to study in Chicago, social science at a time. And while he was there, he was wondering how he could help these poor people getting power over their own situation. That was what he wanted to do, and he knew it from all his life. That was what he wanted to do. And he was studying social science for that reason, and wondering how to go about it. And then he met these two Danish priests who were called Enoch Mortensen and Aage Møller. And they were in Chicago, and he was talking to them at a party, and he said, I want to do this, but what should I do? And they said, you have to go to Denmark and look at the folk high schools and see what is happening there, because that's what you want to do. And then he read everything he could find about Grundtvig and folk high schools in Denmark, and he realized that they were right. He had to go there. He had to go here to see what was actually happening in these schools. So he, after a year, he got money enough to go to Denmark, and he started in Copenhagen, where he stayed at a folk high school, and he learned a lot of Danish very fast, enough so he could speak to the old folk high school teachers. That's rather well done to learn Danish so fast. Then he got a bicycle and he learned how to ride a bike, and he went across the country to different schools, and he came to Esbjerg, which was, I mentioned that, Esbjerg was a school that had to do with the trade union. They were actually supporting Esbjerg Folk High School usually the folk high schools have nothing to do with trade unions, but there have been 3 schools in Denmark with that connection, and Esbjerg was one of them, and that had some that meant something to Myles Horton, that he saw that connection. And then he went to another school called Vrå, which has been known for being very unorganized, very relaxed. And that's what he, among other things, experienced there. Then he went back to the United States, and before he left, he was very much in doubt. What should he do? He was a young man, he was in his 20s, and what should he actually do? And after having been for 1 year at the folk high schools, he said to himself, I have to find a place. I have to find a place, and then I will be there, and then the school will be there. So that's what he decided to do, and he came back to the States, and in Tennessee, where he grew up, he knew an old lady who offered him a house in the mountains, Mount Eagle. And that's where the school was founded. Så skal jeg se, om den her kan. Kan jeg gøre noget for at flytte det her? Ja. Horton has written a autobiography, and he in that he says, all I lived and learned that year became a part of me. And I think it's fantastic that he says all I lived and learned, because that's very much folk high school language. And what did he learn? Aage has actually mentioned a little bit of it. He learned students and teachers together, working together, spending time together. And he saw that peer teaching, that you can teach each other. You don't need to have somebody standing here talking. You might just as well talk with each other, everybody, and then things grow out of that process. So that's, of course, an important learning for him to take with him from the folk high schools here in Denmark. And group singing, he also learned. As Aage said, we always start with a song when we meet in high schools, folk high schools, always. And also in meetings, in other connections, we all very often use a song for starting, because something happens when you sing together. Yeah, and then he learned that it is important to be free of regulations, and it's important to be free of exams. And the informal way of spending time together, so that was what he took with him from Denmark. Yeah. So the school had a mission from the start, from the beginning, where it says, educate and restore human dignity and confidence to the people of the Appalachian, bringing back pride in their culture, music, and heritage. He felt that people had lost pride because of the way they were treated in society. And when he wrote about the Danish folk high schools, actually it's obvious that he has the mission formulated on the background of these folk high schools, where he says, there students studied art, music, mythology, and history related to their lives and their culture. They searched for identity, but not in the standard ways, Identity came from recognizing the value of the people around them and their common heritage and common future. I think it's very important that you don't think of identity just as something has to do with the individual trying to experience things for themselves and so on, but that it has to do with the common heritage. Yes, that was the first years, the first 2 decades. He has a lot to do with the trade unions and people who were unemployed and people who needed to organize to get better social conditions. That was in the 30s and the 40s. And during the 40s, some began to be very critical about him because they thought he was a communist, and they thought the school was a communist school, which it wasn't. But it was fighting for equality. And when you're fighting for equality of all people and people have the same value, of course you will often be to the left somehow, because that's where those opinions or those views belong. So, but when the 50s and 60s, then the civil rights movement were growing in the South, the southern states, and the school started to offer workshops for the civil rights movement people, and all the big ones came there and actually had a lot of inspiration from the way the school was run there. I have mentioned Rosa Parks and Ella Baker, Martin Luther King was there, and others came there. Pete Seeger came there a lot and was also teaching. He was a music teacher together with Myles Horton's wife, Sylvia. She was the one who found the song "We Shall Overcome." That was called "We Will Overcome" was the title of it, and she, together with Pete Seeger, changed it to the song that we know today. In '82, Myles Horton and Highlander was nominated for the Nobel Peace Prize. And they didn't get it, they were nominated. That's a fantastic thing when you think of the situation the school has been in. But I think I came too far. Yeah. Then the next, this is just to give a quick overview of what has happened with the school. In 1959, they were in the States and in the southern states, like Tennessee, they were very scared of communism, and McCarthyism was there, and the teachers were often arrested, and in '59 it was closed down. The school was closed down, and everything was confiscated, and they made an auction and sold everything, even Myles Horton's own things. They were sold, and he had nothing left, and he didn't get 1 penny out of it. After 1 year, he started again, now in Knoxville. That was in the town. The school had so far been in the mountains. This was in the town, and they had a lot of problems with the people harassing them in a lot of ways. Hate crime, in fact. He says in his book, he says, at least we survived, but they had really tough years in Knoxville. They were there for 10 years, and then they moved out to the place where it's situated now, in the mountains, close to Newmarket, Tennessee. 2019, the building was burned. Actually, after, in 59, less than 2 months after, it was also burnt down, the school. When it was empty and they had left it, it burned. And in 2019, it burned again. And I'll show, when I show the pictures in a minute, you will see that. The focus now, it's still the same in a lot of ways. Since they moved to Newmarket, they changed the name to Highlander Research and Education Center. But they are doing the same things as they have done all the time, education. And the pedagogical approach is the one that Aage was talking about, and what he learned in Denmark. It has to do with bringing people together. People know themselves what is important, what they want to have to discuss and have help to do and inspire each other. And then they go home and do things. Horton has always asked people when they finish their workshops or their courses, then when they go home, he says, so what are you going home to do? That's always the question he put. What are you going home to do? And these civil rights people were really going home to do things. But also sustainability and globalization's problems that has to do with economy and equality or inequality in connection with globalization is also what they are working at nowadays. They try to, of course, offer courses that has to do with the problems that we have just now. And they have been excellent in changing from organizing workers to civil rights movements to this. They have been very good at doing that. Yeah, some pictures. That is the first house Horton got out in the mountains in Mount Eagle. Here's in 1955, you have black and white people being taught in the same room, which was illegal. And they were not allowed to eat in the same room. That was Tennessee law. And one of the accusations when they shut down the school in 59 was that they were different colored people in the same room. That was not allowed. In the back is Rosa Parks. She was the one who started the Montgomery bus boycott. She came from Highlander. She had been there short before, discussing what to do about the segregation in the buses. And then one day, you know, most of you probably know the story, she refused to leave a seat because a white person came and said, that's my seat. And she said no. And she didn't move, and she was arrested. And that started the boycott. And the boycott was for 13 months. 50,000 people walked instead of going by bus. And that's fantastic to maintain the energy. And to that, Martin Luther King was part of it also in the background, and Highlander was in the background to keep spirit high. Horton has said in one place that the important thing is to know a path. You have to know a path in order to keep hope, to keep hopeful. If you don't know what path to walk, you lose hope. And so it's important during such an action that you come back to people and you talk about it, and you talk about what is the path we are walking. And they won. The law was changed so that everybody could sit on all seats in the bus. This is a picture where Martin Luther King is there, and Pete Seeger, the tall man in the background, who often came there. He was banned for many years also. His music was for maybe 15 years, but he came back and he was singing when Obama was inaugurated. Actually, he was singing at that party. So that was nice. And this is from the school also, Horton and King. This is from the 25th anniversary. At that point, Martin Luther King was speaking, and at that point he was introduced to the song "We Shall Overcome." And when he left, he talked to the taxi driver and he said, "I just learned a new song, and it's like it sticks to me. I think it sticks to me." And it did. It has been sung in so many occasions of non-violent actions. And all the royalties from that song goes to a fund that is created at the Highlander, and they administer it, the fund. This is a picture from '59 where Myles Horton is watching the sheriff padlocking the door at Highlander Center. And Myles Horton said, "You can padlock the door, but you can't padlock an idea." And Highlander is an idea. And that was, after that, it was burnt down and they moved. This is that's King, and it's Horton, and some of the guys sitting there has something to do with the Communist Party, which some paparazzi has found out and made a postcard. And at that time they put posters on the walls and in the streets, saying that Highlander was a communist place and so on. Here we have Ku Klux Klan marching up to the school. They, of course, were very much against the school. Horton said Highlander did not and does not welcome enrollment of anyone with a totalitarian philosophy, whether from the extreme right or the extreme left. And that was true. They were never organized in any way, and but they were accused for it all the time. And yeah. So that was March, a few years ago. A lot of their files or their old speeches and things, that was the office building that was burnt down. So they lost a lot of things. But they go on. This sign was found on the pavement after that fire, and that's the Romanian Iron Guard cross. And I heard that there was a shooting in a Jewish service where in the States some years ago, and I read that the same sign was on the rifle of that man. They seem to grow in Europe, many places, and obviously but the police never find out who is burning these buildings. These two fires have never been really, they haven't found out who did it, but this is rather obvious. Yes, this is, of course, Obama. Yeah, it's a bit, that's from a meeting Obama had with the Nordic prime ministers from Denmark and Iceland and okay. Obama said in his speech this following: "We would not have been here had it not been for that stone that was thrown in a lake and created ripples of hope that ultimately spread across an ocean to the United States of America. And I might not be standing here were it not for the efforts of people like Eva Bak and others who participated in the Highlander Folk School." So with him, with Obama saying those lines, he is drawing a line from Grundtvig actually to Highlander, to many of the social changes that has happened because of the methods of empowering people at Highlander. So that's, I think that's how it looks now. And that is wonderful, I think, and I haven't been there, I just want very much to go there. That's their sitting room where they discuss stuff and have workshops. They have 25 rocking chairs and everybody can sit and talk and find solutions. And I don't know if you are, should we sing the song? Okay. Can you read it up there? Yeah. I'd just like to finish by telling you that, of course, they have a very good homepage, and you can get newsletters sent from the Highlander Folk School. And one of the latest courses I saw they have offered to people is called No More War, Resources to Deepen Understanding of the Imperialist Invasion of Ukraine and Links to Global Struggles. So they are really, really working on what is necessary just at the time. Yeah, thank you.
Yes, are there any questions? I like to thank you very much, both of you, for coming here. And you have been introducing us very much to our theme in this conference, I think. So it's a very nice introduction, both to the ideas and impulses that our culture here in Denmark is built on, and to the conference. I've just been out with the bus driver. He's waiting for most of you to take you home for today. That's why I'm breathing. But it has been interesting for me. And I hope everybody has enjoyed your speech. Thank you very much for coming. And as you possibly will know now, we will start singing tomorrow morning, 9 o'clock. Have a good night, safe travel to your places where you're sleeping. Good night.